Hi everyone, I'm Justisa and welcome to Dark History of Sweden. It's been a while since my last Dark History of Sweden video and I kind of missed it, to be honest. A lot has happened since last. As you guys can see, I've cut my hair. That was rather impulsive, but it turned out pretty good. I like it. But no more chit-chatting. Let's dive into this week's episode of Dark History of Sweden. Today we will talk about Beckomberga Mental Asylum, which is one of the biggest in Swedish history. If you want more, I do have a playlist. I have actually several playlists, but I have a playlist about mental asylums, and there will be a link up in the corner and at the end of this video. And if you like my content, please make sure you are subscribed and hit that bell so you don't miss one. I have some really exciting things planned for this summer. In the 1900s in Sweden, there were many who were diagnosed as mentally ill and had to be put in an asylum. But there weren't enough beds anywhere. We talked about Katarina Asylum a few weeks ago. If you haven't seen that one, there will be a link down in the description. This is where Beckomberga began. Katarina's asylum was the only place in Stockholm that could take them in. At one point, there were 2,000 people hospitalized there. It was filled to the brim and there were not enough staff or beds to care for them. They started to plan for a big institution in the early 1920s. In 1929, the construction started. It was planned to have 1,604 beds and was designed by the architect Carl Westman. In 1932, Beckomberga Mental Asylum opened its doors. This was the first institution in Stockholm that was actually for the mentally ill. Unlike Katarina Asylum, that was a temporary hospital. Together with Långbro Asylum, there were 2,444 beds for the mentally ill in Stockholm. Between the years of 1932 and 1938, a total of 4,733 patients had been in and out of Beckomberga. 2,530 of them were women, 2,203 were men. The typical treatments were used here just like everywhere else. Medical restraints, balneotherapy, and electrotherapy. I've talked about these ones before, but I feel like I need to repeat them since it was quite a while ago, and it's really important for Beckomberga's history. Medical restraints meant that the patient was restrained with sturdy leather belts on their sickbed. Their entire body and head was strapped down so they couldn't move an inch. The patient could be tied down like this for hours, days, even weeks. Not allowed to get up, not even to use the bathroom. If they needed to, they had to relieve themselves in the bed. Balneotherapy was much like medical restraints, but instead of being tied to the bed, the patient was submerged in a special bathtub filled with a medium tempered water. Here, they could also be left for days on end. Electrotherapy was and is performed by sending electric currents through electrodes that placed on each temple of the head, or back and front on one side of the head. The volt lies between 70 and 120 and is sent during about 100 milliseconds to 6 seconds. Insulin shock therapy is a new one that I actually learned about while I did research for this video. This type of therapy meant that they would inject the patient with large doses of insulin repeatedly until they went into a daily coma. This went on for weeks until they got the result they wanted. This was a popular method during the 1940s and 1950s. In 1944, lobotomy was introduced to Swedish medical care. That exact same year, it was introduced and used as one of the therapies at Beckomberga Mental Asylum. What is a lobotomy? It is the careful procedure of inserting an awl through the tear canal up into the frontal lobe to sever it from the rest of the brain. Incapacitate it. The thing about lobotomy is that even if they said that it helped, they also documented that at first the patient got aggressive and used foul language, but after a few months, they calmed down. One of the many patients that was treated with lobotomy at Beckomberga Asylum was Sigrid Hjertén, who sadly passed away during the procedure. But more on the patients next week, so make sure you are subscribed and hit that bell so you don't miss it. Lobotomy in itself was controversial and highly debated, but there was one huge controversy in Sweden after an article was published by Gunnar Dahlberg. He explained that one type of lobotomy was making a hole in each temple, then whisking around the frontal lobe so they no longer worked. Besides the awfully horrendous treatments that took place, the patients were extremely malnourished, ignored, and maltreated. Most often, the patients didn't even get better and stayed there until their death. Beckomberga was opened 30 years of 1932 and 1995. That is 63 active years. If you saw my last video and follow me over on Instagram, I highly recommend that you do, you'll know that I actually had the chance to go to Beckomberga. And what I found is quite interesting. I'm fascinated by Sweden in the sense that we repurpose not only our garbage, but our facilities. Most of the buildings, just like the ones at St. Lars, are in use. A few buildings were empty and not in use from 1995, but there was a small psychiatric clinic in one part of the area until 2008. The older hospital buildings were in 2008 bought by Riksbyggen, a Swedish housing cooperative. These buildings were later remodeled into apartments. In total, they produced 350 apartments. Out of those, 42 are senior apartments and 77 are campus apartments. There is still a care center in the area. From the 1970s, they opened up a care center under the name Medicinal Center, but later on changed it to Bromma Hospital. That is all I have on Beckomberga Mental Asylum and the treatments that took place there. Next week, we will talk more about the patients and their stories. So make sure you are subscribed and hit that bell so you don't miss it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Take care of each other and yourself, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!